Welcome, students. This lecture provides an overview of some of the important information that you'll learn about through this module. It is not the entire content. You will need to watch the videos and read the chapter. There will be discussion questions that you will need to answer as you go through the module. We will talk more about adaptations in another module. While the IDEA defines learning disabilities according to this slide, the definition is hard, cold law, with little room or recognition of the impact of the terminology on families. Imagine how a parent feels when, after an evaluation, a psychologist tells a parent that her child has minimal brain dysfunction. I remember that day. I can still see the long, drawn face across the desk from me, the impersonal clinical tone, rocking my world. But we need to understand that what was known about learning disabilities more than 35 years ago is very different from what we know and from what we can do today. This particular term, minimal brain dysfunction, is somewhat out of date. It's a leftover from a legacy of research and future advancement. I hope to put a personal face to this discussion of learning disabilities. The medical model describes learning disabilities across several areas of academics. It is interesting to note that many of these areas are language dependent. For instance, reading, writing, spelling are all related to language skills. My own son had difficulties in all of the academic areas, especially in reading. He did not learn to read until he was in the 4th grade. This slide provides more information regarding the medical model. Please review it carefully. Learning disabilities can be classified as mild, moderate, or severe. The more the severity, the more strategic and intensive interventions need to be. Dyslexia, difficulty in reading, dyscalculia, difficulty with math, and dysgraphia, difficulty with handwriting, used to be seen as individual types of disabilities. They are not considered as such any longer. Learning disabilities is mostly seen as a syndrome that can include reading, math, handwriting, spelling, and written expression, in addition to other difficulties. Even though the terms are not used as often, you are likely to hear the term dyslexia. Even recently, I've had parents contact me to tell me that their child is dyslexic, and in many cases, parents tell me that their child reverses letters. Some time ago, dyslexia was thought to be a visual problem in which the student would reverse letters, and that was seen as the cause of the reading difficulty. Now we know something different. Dyslexia, or difficulty in reading, is not primarily a visual problem, but rather is language-based. But still, myths persist. The use of the term or refusal to use the term is more of a philosophical position, but in reality, the actual term means nothing more than reading difficulty. It doesn't tell us anything about the cause of the reading difficulty or what to do about it. So, I don't argue about the use of terms very often just because it doesn't serve a purpose. I am more concerned about finding out what the child can and can't do and then teaching the child. While many children with learning disabilities do learn how to read and often catch up with their peers, it takes intensive, specialized, unrelenting instruction to close that reading gap. Please notice that the criteria most states use is a discrepancy between intellectual ability and academic achievement. This is one of the key criteria for learning disability, and this criteria has caused the field much consternation. With that being said, please also note that the federal law no longer mentions a discrepancy between ability and achievement. It is, however, the practice of most states to use a discrepancy formula to determine eligibility for a child under the category of learning disabilities. The way this works is that an evaluator would give two kinds of tests, an IQ test and an achievement test. If the score for the achievement test was significantly below the IQ test, in some states the criteria was 1 standard deviation, other states 1.5 standard deviations, and even in some states 2 standard deviations, then there would be considered a discrepancy between intellectual abilities and achievement. This formula is not helpful in telling the teacher or family what to do about it. It merely places the students in a category so that they can receive services. The range of standard deviations across states actually have led families to move from one state to another in order to obtain special education services for their child. A family would move out of a state requiring 2 standard deviations for services to a state that required only 1 or 1.5 standard deviation discrepancy. Another factor to consider is that if a child's achievement score was 85 and his IQ score was 86, there would not be a discrepancy. So a child who truly was behind his peers and in need of support would not get it because there was no discrepancy between his ability and his achievement. My son had above average IQ according to the ability test and a below average achievement, resulting in almost 2 full standard deviations. This was especially true in the areas of reading, written expression, and math. This cartoon was found on a disability website. This discrepancy model between ability and achievement is often seen as the wait to fail model. When children are very young and at the beginning stages of learning to read, write, and do math, the differences between normally achieving children and children with disabilities are not nearly as pronounced. Most teachers, however, recognize that there is something different about one child in comparison to other children in the class. In kindergarten or first grade, the child might not quite meet the criteria, but as the child progresses from grade to grade, the academics become more difficult, more challenging, and the discrepancy becomes more apparent, more pronounced. So finally, the child qualifies according to the discrepancy criteria used by that particular state. But by then, the problem will be much more difficult to remediate because the profession waited for the child to fail before qualifying for services, sometimes as late as 3rd or 4th grade. This is especially important when research shows that early intervention is the key to successful remediation. This wait to fail is why my son did not learn to read until he was in 4th grade. I can still hear the teachers saying, "Don't worry, he'll read when he's ready." But remember again, this was 35 years ago. Special education has different orientations now, but also keep in mind that some attitudes and beliefs still persist. So be on the lookout. You have a video that shares about response to intervention. What is most important in this slide is that by using the response to intervention model, the profession is attempting to eliminate the need to wait to fail. Waiting to fail also puts parents into difficult positions. If they do not help their child with academics and have a hands-off approach, then the child will fail and cause lack of confidence, social emotional problems, especially in school, and the result will impact the child's self-esteem. If the parents do help their child, often taking over the role of the teacher at home, then it will possibly delay school services. It puts families into a spot, the proverbial rock and a hard place. Language seems to be the most elemental contributing factor to LD. The chapter you will read will provide more details about this, and it is very important to understand. A child with learning disability will usually have difficulty across reading, writing, and spelling. The child may also have difficulties with math, organization, behavioral and/or social emotional, gross motor and/or small motor coordination. In addition, the child may also have difficulty with self-regulation. Furthermore, some children will also demonstrate symptoms of ADHD. Some children will express a difficulty in one area and others will not. Some will have a variety of difficulties across multiple areas. Another complicating factor is that one child might perform above grade level in math but have difficulty in reading or writing or vice versa. Therefore, LD is difficult to accurately define because of the variability of symptoms across the population. Just keep thinking that these kids are smart. Be careful not to equate difficulties from the previous slide with ability to be successful in the world. We have many, many people with learning disabilities who have achieved greatly in their fields. Middle school and high school is usually the most problematic for children with learning disabilities. The content that is taught becomes much more complex, and children with learning disabilities without the proper support and teaching can fall further and further behind and will have devastating results to their self esteem, which can impact their life choices later on. Specific learning disabilities is the largest category for identification of all children with disabilities, thus, it is called high incidence. The specific cause of learning disabilities is still unknown. Recent brain imaging with MRI and functional MRI does show some differences that indicate that the problem may be based in the central nervous system, but so much more research is needed. The danger with focusing upon the cause is that we don't focus upon fixing the problem. Instead, we have a tendency to use it as an excuse. Oh, poor little guy, he can't help it. He has a problem in his brain. Well, that just is not true. We have many, many effective educational approaches and teaching techniques that can make a monumental difference in a child's later performance. What the fMRI shows is that after language-based reading interventions, the brains of children with reading disability look exactly the same as the brains of normally achieving children. It is most likely that there is a hereditary link to learning disabilities. If you have a child with learning disabilities, then your other children can also have some level of difficulty, or you may have aunts or uncles or cousins with learning disabilities also. This is complicated by the environment, which can exacerbate the problems greatly. I want to emphasize this again that environmental factors can exacerbate the problem. Highly effective instruction, direct, intensive, systematic instruction, research based instruction can effectively remediate the difficulties. Children are usually identified through using several different kinds of tests. The Wechsler Intelligence Test is one such ability test. The Woodcock-Johnson is an educational test of achievement. This slide discusses the different types of tests that a school could possibly use in order to provide information. Notice, please, that a full assessment is necessary and may be composed of a variety of instruments or tests. Again, the video has a really good discussion about RTI. The important point here is RTI is for general education. It is used to screen all children. Identification is made as children have increasing difficulty after typical instruction, and then stronger interventions and supports are put into place. Different tiers of support are implemented in RTI. Tier 1 is typical support, general education. Tier 2 may be small group or extra support in general education curriculum. Tier 3 is usually special education, which is sometimes one-on-one instruction and or specifically designed instruction. We will address more in-depth specially designed instruction in a later module. Here are some benefits of using the RTI process for all children. The thinking here is that all children need research-based instruction, and if children who need just a little extra support for a variety of reasons through a Tier 2 intervention, then they will not be misidentified as children with disabilities and still receive the support necessary to achieve. Explicit instruction has been shown to be the most effective type of instruction to close the achievement gap for students with disabilities. This type of instruction was pioneered by Siegfried Engelmann. It has over a 40 years history of a research base that has shown its effectiveness. Teachers can design this type of instruction, but it takes learning about it, some planning, and analysis. There are also commercial programs based upon the principles of direct instruction that have been shown to be very effective. The most important part of direct instruction is that it is explicit. It takes the mystery out of learning, and it is systematic, building one concept upon another in a logical manner from the easiest task to the more difficult. It is interesting that most LD advocates do not support full inclusions for students with disabilities. Especially, it is interesting that this is so in this age of full inclusion. Many parents of children with disabilities want more intensive interventions for their children with disabilities. The problem is that students with LD usually need intensive, relentless intervention based upon the individual needs of the child. This is difficult, not impossible, to achieve in an inclusion setting. In many inclusion settings, the intervention is more likely to be that of support in the general education curriculum and not direct teaching or the redesign of instruction. There are schools throughout the United States that especially focus upon children with learning disabilities. Landmark School on the East Coast is an example of this type of school. They usually focus upon small class sizes and specially designed instruction. The effectiveness of the schools naturally are dependent upon the type of instruction that is implemented. Landmark has several materials for consumption for special education teachers or for general education teachers who need such materials. You have several tasks in this module. Please read the chapter carefully. It will provide you with very much needed information for you to do your job. In the meantime, I want to introduce you to Becca. Becca is a person with learning disabilities. These disabilities were moderate to severe. Becca's parents were educators. In fact, her father was a colleague of mine. I remember when he stood in the doorway of my office and said that he thought Becca had a problem, that she was not learning at the same rate as his other children. I evaluated Becca and set up a program for remediation and worked with Becca from the time she was in second grade through fifth grade until her family moved from the area. We taught her reading, writing, and written expression. In addition, her family provided her with support and tutoring throughout middle school and high school. The intervention we used was explicit, systematic instruction. Becca is now in her third year of medical school. Her family sent me this picture last year as a thank you and as encouragement for me to tell future general and special educators of the great future that these young people can have. It is up to us.